speaking about his academic research and work, as well as professional engagements. He received his first degree at the University of Ghana, Legon, Master of Arts at McMaster University here in Hamilton, and his PhD at the University of Toronto in 1986. Dr. Day, how did you enjoy your time in Hamilton? Good. We're glad to have you back. It's an honor. He's currently a full professor of humanities, social sciences, and social justice education with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at U of T. He has served as the first director of the Centre for Integrative Anti-Racism Studies at the University of Toronto. His teaching and research interests are in the areas of anti-racism, minority schooling, international development, anti-colonial thought, and Indigenous knowledge systems. Professor Day has published extensively in the areas of anti-racism education, minority schooling, African education, international development. He has 22 books and doesn't sleep, as well as over 150 refereed journal articles and book chapters to his credit. In February 2011, he released an edited international reader on Indigenous philosophies and critical education, which continues to receive much international acclaim. In 2012, he published the book Contemporary Issues in African Science Education. He's a distinguished fellow of the Molefe Kete Asante Institute, a nonprofit independent think tank based in Philadelphia to advance the cause of global African development. He's been a main proponent and a pioneering voice in the establishment of black-focused, African-centered schools in Canada. He's received numerous awards, including the City of Toronto's William P. Hubbard Award for Race Relations in 2003. And finally, in June of 2007, Professor Day was installed as a traditional chief in Ghana, specifically as the Aduma Kwahene of the town of Asokore near Koporidua in the new Joaben traditional area of Ghana. His stool name is Nanasefa Atweneboa I. I've got about 20 more minutes of his introduction because it's a lot of stuff that he's done. No, I'm kidding. Please help me enjoy and welcoming Dr. Day.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Okay, yeah, we just had lunch, right? I want to begin by thanking the land on which we stand. I think the magnanimity of Indigenous peoples of Canada in allowing us to be here, and I'm grateful for that. I also want to recognize there are some elders in the room, and as a chief, I need to recognize the ancestors and ancestry. I also want to thank the Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion, and in particular, my good friend Evelyn. We go way back for getting me here. I also want to thank you, and I'm hoping that at least there's more than one person in the room here who came to hear me speak. Now, I say more than one because at least I've met one. Right? So I'm hoping that there's more than one. I'm going to talk about how we build resilient communities, and I think the term about resiliency, right? I'm looking at it more not in terms of surviving. I think if communities survive, there's more than to survive. I think we need to talk about how we build our collective responsibilities in order to help healthy and sustainable communities. And that's what my focus is going to be. And given my work in Toronto, there are two things that I normally work with, and I just want to share with you. One is it's a saying that it's not what you are called that is important, it's what you respond to that is very, very important. And then, of course, something that I've been quoted very often, and it's the point that any community is as good as we collectively work to make it. It speaks about the issue of responsibility and our collective implications in what we want to talk about. I have this quote here, which is from one of my doctoral students at the University of Toronto. But the point is, look, I'm not here saying just agree with what I'm saying. But I want you to take what I'm saying and work with it. I don't believe there's something like preaching to the converted. If we are converted, we didn't have the issues that we have. Now, that doesn't mean that there are not things that we should be happy and gloat and acknowledge. I think there have been changes, But we have more work to do if we want to talk about how we build inclusive communities. We have more work to do. So I'm going to be very provocative because I want you to shake and get out of your complacencies. So understand me in that perspective. I want us to get out of our complacencies. It doesn't mean that we have been working, but more work needs to be done. Now let me start with sharing some African proverbs, because of late I'm doing some work on African proverbs. Now among the Akan of Ghana, there's a saying that if you want to know how heavy a bag of salt is, you ask the one who is carrying it. Right? Sometimes some people speak on others' behalf. Well, if you want to understand oppression, ask the ones who are close, who are at the receiving end of that. Secondly, we have to be very humble in our claim to know, and again, I can't say the arrogance knows the limits of his arrogance in front of the butcher's shop. Now you know what will happen if you are arrogant in front of that shop. Now to me, this is about the humility of knowing. Like if you claim to know about racism, sexism, homophobia, we have to be very humble in our claim to know about it. Then also the question of the beard came to meet the eyelashes. It's about how sometimes we reinvent wheels. We don't learn from history, we are always reinventing. But let's forget, there's a past. We must learn from the past. We must learn from that history. And I think this is what he is speaking about in this context. Then the Kiambu of Kenya talk about you end badly if you don't start well. And this is the importance of having a solid foundation. If you're going to have sustainable, healthy communities, we must have solid foundation. Otherwise, the house will crumble. And we must have that. And then a good name keeps someone or somebody. It's about what we do, our actions. We live in posterity. We put to judge. And of course, shortcuts are always not the safest. Hard work. If you want healthy, sustainable communities, we have to work for it. There are no shortcuts to that. There are no shortcuts to that. And then the Igbo and Kwani of Nigeria, they speak about it is only the adamant fly that follows the corpse to the grave. It's about importance of listening. And then stealing a drum is easy, but where to play? Our actions will definitely reveal where we are. And finally, crab legs cannot be stolen and eaten in secret. You know crab legs, when you're eating, you make noise. Somebody's going to do that. Now, where am I coming from with some of this? I think for me, just to talk a bit about my personal location, I mean, Emily, the question about where I'm coming from, I think I'm someone who's been writing on questions of inclusion, anti-racism, race, integrative anti-racism, this race, class, gender intersection for years. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is that we have to be bold and courageous to name the issues for what they are. Sometimes we don't want to say race, we say discrimination. The last time I checked in the dictionary, race, racism, and discrimination mean differently. They are not the same. So let's be able to have the courage to name them, because we cannot put it under the carpet. We cannot wish it away. We have to address it. We have to have an honest discussion about these issues, about race, racism, sexism, homophobia. Have that honest discussion, something that works for me. I think part of the problem that I see now is what I call the power of neoliberalism, which is everything now is about markets, it's about economics. So somebody can be racist so far as he uses that to what? To get market for his or her product. And I see that parallel with some of the students that I deal with, right? There's a creeping, what I call creeping survivalism, right? Well, we have mortgage to pay, we have to get, and I understand sometimes people have to pay fees, high tuition fees. And so they come to school, they want to get education and go and get a job to survive, to have families. I understand that. But we can't be about survival alone. So this creeping survivalism, we need to shake the boots and be able to deal with that. That our world is more than, and the way to deal with that is to trouble how markets define our existence. Questions of markets and economics define our existence. There is something about community that is more than markets It's more about selling it to the highest bidder. Then we must connect our identities and social movement politics. I think for me, my anti-racism work and building communities, one of the things that I've realized is that you cannot, for example, as a body who lives in Canada, not connect my ambitions, my struggles and aspirations with indigenous people's struggles. Questions about land rights, self-determination. They might be connected to our struggles. Otherwise, our struggles become hollow. And I also, as a scholar, I think it's very, very important to talk about the pursuit of knowledge. But what good is knowledge if it doesn't compel action? Knowledge must compel action. And that's why, for me, I talk about the power of an anti-colonial intellectuality. That some of us are going to be scholars, but also we become scholars who are warriors because we want to fight to make our society good for everyone. You know, I remember giving a keynote address in BC and somebody saying, well, the problem we have in Canada is all these immigrants. And I said, well, we are already here. Now, my role here is to make Canada even better than I came to meet it. And sometimes when we say this, it's not that we are upset. It's just we want a healthy, productive, sustainable society for everyone. And that's for me, sometimes it means becoming a distinctive voice. Becoming that voice of difference. It's so important. Becoming that distinctive voice. Sometimes we are afraid to speak out. But we need to if we want to improve our communities. So rethinking the idea of communities and community. Look, we create communities. Communities are not hanging in space. We work to create communities. So, you know, if you want to have communities, we work to create them. And also we realize that these communities are not communities of sameness. They are communities of differences. Like when we talk of, say, the Aboriginal community or the African community or the Asian community, these are communities of differences. And therefore we have to work with that idea and notion of difference. But we must also be careful about what I call the unilateral fragmentation around difference. There are certain things that connect us. They're not just all about the differences. There are certain things that connect us. We must be able to speak about those connections. But we must also be careful sometimes, and it happens where we conscript this idea of a fractured community in order to deny responsibility and accountability. An example of that is where you say, well, the community itself can't get along. What are you talking about? It's so divisive. And therefore, we don't talk about responsibility and issues of complicity. So the times and the moments where we conscript the idea of fractured community needs to be addressed. But we must also, if we talk about building communities, we have to see these communities as sites of healing, sites of repairing damage, repairing souls and spirits. Racism, sexism, homophobia, they hurt, they wound. And we need these communities to heal, to repair the wounds, to make us whole again. I think also it's very, very important when we talk of communities to see that communities is not just here and now. Communities have issues that sometimes transcend, and I think the work that some of us, I'm sure we all do. There are interrelations of the challenges that face our communities. And it's like issues that sometimes have to do, we talk about migration, family unification, community development, questions about sovereignty and land rights. These issues are intersecting and they connect. So what I'm saying here is that when we talk of building these communities, we must see that the issues are going to be complex and they intersect and be able to deal with that. You cannot deal with one issue and leave the others intact because they intersect. But the community is also a site of knowledge. If we build healthy communities, we realize that these are sites of knowledge and we can learn and move forward as a broader community when we tap into that world of knowledge that exists in our communities. You know, sometimes we spend a lot of time talking about unity, that we need to get unified. It's very, very important. But unity is a means. Unity is a means to an end, and the end is power. A unified community must have the power to define its own destiny, the power to be able to share resources, the power to design its own future, and not have somebody to design their futures. That is a question of the power, in that sense. But leadership is also going to be critical. Building local capacity for leadership is going to be critical. And one thing that I say, given who I am, because I speak from my racialized embodiment, as an African Canadian scholar, I speak from that embodiment. That to me, I think I am implicated in that. The sense to which some of us, when we become middle class, when we move into middle class, we forget our communities. The intelligentsia, the work that we do, how does it speak to our communities, the challenges, the possibilities that our communities are going through, how do we speak about that? Unto whom more is given, much is expected. And then not pitching our fears and anxieties against people's pain and suffering. And I see that all the time. So you have a fear about, well, people are moving into your neighborhood. You want to protect your property. So there's a fear. And then you pit it against those who are talking about pain and suffering. They are talking about the pain and suffering of racism, the pain and suffering of sexism, the pain and suffering of homophobia, the pain and suffering of not getting work, not getting a job, not getting housing, health issues. So we have to be careful that we don't pit our fears and anxieties against the pains and suffering of people when they speak. And of course, the importance of connecting the global diasporas. Now, what are some of our shared responsibilities here? I think we have to be able to claim knowledge about our authentic self. I'm not talking about the authentic self in terms of a purity. No, I'm talking about the authentic self in terms of being who one is and not perform for somebody else. To be who you are, to be able to talk about that and not perform. Because you want to perform to be accepted. You want to perform to be validated. You want to perform to be legitimized. No. To be true to oneself is very important. It's also developing the courage to resist how our histories are taught to us. You know, history is not about who discovered A or who discovered B or who discovered C. History is the totality of our lived experience. So when we talk about history, it's about lives. African history is not just about enslavement. It's broader. Canadian history is encompassing. It takes up many things, and we need to speak about that. But we also need to ask the questions about omissions, negations, absences. Who is not here? Let's look around us. Who is not here? And ask that question, and why? The absences, the negations, and the omissions. We have to ask about what is social justice, really? Equity. I think to me, a central tenet of social justice and equity work is engaging the question of power. Power. And power as power is distributed, or as power is understood in asymmetrical relations around questions of race, class, gender, sexuality, and disability. Also developing multiple lenses of inquiry. You know, we read the world differently. I'm speaking to you differently because I speak from my history, my identity, my culture, and my experience. It doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean Evelyn is wrong. But we need to have that conversation that engages in multiple lenses of inquiry so that we are able to tell the complete story. Other stories are not part of the conversation because we have a meta-narrative. We have a dominant narrative that presents us with only one view. Let's begin to speak about multiple lenses of inquiry and come to a complete understanding of our world. And of course, we create learning communities that when we do, for example, in our workplaces, we learn from each other, but it's workable because we are learning communities. And here, to my work in schools, for example, one of the things that I talk about is when you look at schools, right? There's a sense where rather than create communities, everybody wants to be the one who is validated, who gets the A classes. They want to be the one who is acknowledged. So we don't build the communities. Growing up in Ghana, right? One of the things that those of us who could were seen as smart. We got our acknowledgement of being smart by helping others, right? But you come into a different context, you want to be the only one with the A plus, so you want to keep it to yourself. You don't want to talk about your responsibility to the other learner. How do we create that community of learners? That if my child is having problems in school and your child is doing well, your response should not be to say, tough luck, that is your problem. It is our problem. It is our problem. So when we have people who are having challenges in schools and other students are doing well, it is our collective problem. If some schools have computers, other schools don't have it, it is our collective problem. And not say, well, we can afford that, therefore that's fine. It is their problem, they have to deal with that. This means you have to start to ask some questions. And so for me, the question I want to leave you with in terms of this is, how do we frame an inclusive, anti-racist, and anti-colonial global future? And what is the nature of the work that is required to get us to that future? What sort of education should be taking place in our schools and workplaces? And what are we going to do with that education? How do we refashion our roles as learners in order to create a more relevant understanding of what it means to be human and human again? Sometimes we lose that sense of what makes us human, what makes us persons. Because sometimes we have to deal with the issues of survival. And how do we treat that? How do we deal with what I'm calling sometimes the depoliticization of inclusion and the domestication of culture and diversity? No one tells the full story, so how do we tell the multiple stories in order to get to the complete story? And how do we bring a community of knowing to our work in the search of knowledge? There are certain principles of building resilient communities that we can work with. One is this idea that I've called messy utopia, and I've always from Michael Adams about the unlikely utopia. I think we need to strive for a messy utopia. The messy utopia is not going to be fine and dandy. It's not good. We are going to ruffle some feathers. We have to accept that. Some people are going to be upset, but that's the nature of the work, because we are not all included. So we have to understand that. It's not going to be over a cup of tea. We have to understand that. It's part of dealing with the issues of power. Because part of the problem is that sometimes the future itself is being contested. The problem is that for some of us, our futures are designed for us. And we want to be able to claim and design our own futures. Of course, we have to talk about our collective complexities and implications. No one is off the hook. That's what I'm saying. No one is off the hook. We are all involved. We are all implicated. We all have their responsibilities. But we have to be able to talk about this sense of entitlement. That sometimes we have this sense of entitlement, that we have a sense of entitlement to come here, to be here. Of course you have the sense of entitlement, but you must also have matching responsibilities. If you think you belong in that community, what do you see as your responsibilities? We sometimes must create this sense of entitlement without any matching responsibilities. And we have to be able to connect that. And we have to address the liberal notion of inclusion. You can be included while it still exists on the margins. One of the things that I've said, and the Ministry of Education in their document quotes me on that, is about this notion of inclusion. And I want you to think about this. How do we understand inclusion by simply adding to what already exists? When what already exists is the source of the problem in the first place. All what you're doing is reproducing the problem. So inclusion, to me, we have to rethink it. And sometimes it means beginning anew, to start afresh. You talk about inclusion as starting afresh. Because the foundation is already shaky. And if you add to that, it's just going to crumble. So let's start afresh. Also, we have to rethink the conventional understanding of social justice. You know, the ideal thing in social justice is that let's treat everybody the same. I think that is the ideal. We have to work at it. But we haven't gotten there yet. And so we have to have multiple understandings of social justice. And one of the understandings of social justice we don't talk about is that we have to target responses to groups that have been disenfranchised, groups that are facing the challenges. Because when you continue to say, let's treat everybody the same, when there's already historical inequities, when you do that, what have you done? If already the scales are this, and you say, let's treat everybody the same, we are moving everybody up. The difference is the inequities still exist. So it means we have to target groups that need that hand, the opportunities. Nobody calls for a helping hand, they call for opportunities. What good is opportunity if you cannot make use of it? That's what I'm talking about. And then the question of representation is about power. Merit, the way we talk about excellence. You know excellence if it looks like you. If George speaks like you, George is smart. You know excellence if it looks like you. Let's trouble that. So what is our definition of excellence? Is what I'm talking about. What is our definition of excellence? It's to trouble that. And to deal with this notion of the culture of survivalism. The power of naming operations, which I spoke about. Of late, I'm writing about the creation of what I call the trialectic space. It's about how we bring the body, the mind, the soul, and the spirit together. It's about questions of making us whole again. You have so much emphasis on the body and the mind. Sometimes we leave the soul and the spirit out. If you want to talk about creating the human good, it's about coming to that trialectic space where the body, the mind, the soul, and the spirits come together. And I know some people are very reluctant to talk about spirituality, but to me, it is a big part of healing. I think we have to be able to understand his spirituality beyond fundamentalism. We have to talk about the understanding of the self and the relation with each other in terms of what we do in our engagement. And of course, as I say about all this, I believe in the pedagogy of hope. I believe that something else is possible. We have to work with that hope. Otherwise, there's no point for us to do the work we're doing. We have to believe in that pedagogy of hope, that something else is possible. So I just conclude with the lessons to me, in the sense of the contemporary issues of social movements. And I think to me, if you're talking about these committees must be committees of resistance. We must not be afraid of resistance. Rather than punish resistance, let's reward resistance. Let's reward resistance. We're so much used to punishing resistance. Let's begin to reward resistance. Let's work with the communities of differences. Let's understand it. The challenges of coalition politics, that is about power, how we share power. The issue is about how we share power. Right? How we share power. It's so pointing, George, bring your African garb and come and let's dance and celebrate. But when it comes to jobs, when it comes to who is the principal, who is the teachers, no, that is the issue simply about merit. Right? To me, there's a celebration and there's something which is called dealing fundamentally with questions of power. It's about resource. Communities are about networking and information sharing. Those who have the privilege of history, those who have been here and have that privilege of history, have a responsibility to use that privilege to help those who are coming after you, to use that privilege of history. And communities are about agenda setting. For some communities, issues of education are very important to them. Other communities, questions of housing are very important. Other communities, questions of family unification or employment. But we must have that public advocacy as part of our community work. That sometimes we have to engage the troubling spots. We have to engage the messy spots, the spots that have to do with our complacencies and influence social policy. So to conclude, I want to ask you this. How do we speak from our race, our gender, our class, our sexual embodiments in doing social justice work? How is our integrative anti-racist work, which works with race, class, gender, sexuality, able to shape social policy? And as we do this work, let us remember that there's always the sensation of moving while standing still. And wherever we are, please don't just be here. Don't just be here. Don't just be here. Thank you.
enlightening to hear the words of Dr. Day. And, you know, thinking of my own history as an Iroquois woman, it certainly reflects a lot of that. When you think about, you talk about making us whole, and that's about the whole physical, mentally, emotional, and spiritual aspects of an individual. And you talk about voice, giving people their voice, and I think that's a huge piece that we need to remember, that that's what makes us stronger, that's what helps us tell our story. You know, understanding who we are, where we come from, and moving forward together with respect. Respect about the individual, but respect about what they bring to the table. Certainly. Thank you for that message. Let's give a small token of our appreciation for spending lunch with us. And Lincoln's wife is here, and she would also like to give this to you. And this is also from us, and thank you for sharing your work. Thank you.